Hey guys, tonight we step back into a smoky great hall somewhere in the late 14th century. The air is thick with roasted meat, wet wool, and a faint undertone of when did anyone last clean this floor? You're about to attend a medieval dinner, a scene both grand and gross, polished and pungent. Flickering candlelight bounces off goblets, dogs snuffle underfoot for scraps, and a jester mutters something about taxes that's probably treason. You're invited to dine among lords, monks, and merchants. But beware, one wrong sip, one loud burp, and you might find yourself escorted to the stocks. You probably won't survive this, but at least you'll have a story for the afterlife. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do.
Know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the heavy oak doors and step into the great hall. The place smells of tallow candles and sweet wine spilled hours ago. Servants dart like shadows, carrying trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread that double as plates. The Lord's seat, raised on a small platform, glows with reflected torchlight. That's where your eyes are not supposed to go. Looking too long might seem like ambition, and ambition at dinner can get you more than indigestion.
Across from you, a man uses his sleeve as a napkin. The woman beside him gives a polite smile, then discreetly wipes her hands on the tablecloth, a luxury most diners never touch. You realize this entire event is less about food and more about theater. Every gesture, every bite signals your rank, your manners, your right to belong. A quirky detail catches your eye. Spoons. They gleam differently across the table. Some are carved wood, others pewter, a few even silver. People bring their own spoons to dinner, tucked into pouches. It's both utensil and personality test. You look down at yours, a borrowed wooden one, slightly warped. Perfect. You won't stand out.
Then there's the strange quiet before the first course. It's not reverence, it's calculation. Who gets served first? Who pretends not to care? A boy at the far end snickers as a goose leg drops off a platter and rolls toward the floor. Someone mutters, a sign of famine, though the dogs clearly disagree. Factually speaking, medieval banquets were designed around hierarchy as much as hunger. The Lord might have dozens of guests, yet each course served in waves that reinforced order. First nobles, then lesser ranks, then whoever survived the elbows. And here you sit, balancing a wooden spoon over a bowl of stew, realizing that even dinner is a battlefield of quiet glances
And careful silences. A jester clinks a small bell and announces, "May the bread be hard enough to cut and the wine soft enough to forget." Laughter ripples, wine sloshes, and for a brief moment you almost forget the fleas, the draft, and the dog sniffing your boot. Still, as you raise your cup, you wonder what tomorrow's dinner might bring, if indeed you've earned another invitation. You shift uncomfortably on your bench, scanning the table like it's a battlefield map. Who sits where is not random. It's a silent declaration of power, wealth, and family reputation. The Lord occupies the high seat near the salt, of course. Beside him, the clergy might flaunt their influence with a subtle flick of their rosary. Merchants lean forward, their pouches heavy with coins, subtly showing off their civilian worth. You, on the other hand, have the privilege of identifying every slip of etiquette you might commit, while secretly wondering how long before the roast chickens reach your end of the table. The hierarchy is labyrinthine, a whispered rumor. The person seated closest to the Lord receives the first chicken leg, both a reward and a potential hazard. Historians still argue whether seating really reflected pure social ranking, or if sometimes it was tactical, keeping rivals near or so the Lord could judge their manners. You, naturally, don't want to be near the Lord. This isn't just social paranoia. Spilling gravy on a noble's sleeve could lead to a public rebuke, or worse, a pointedly offered
Brussels sprout of shame. Your eyes drift down the table. The lowly seats are the wild zone. You notice a pair of siblings fighting over the last piece of bread, their elbows bumping like amateur fencers. Beyond them, a merchant leans over to whisper a scandal about the Lord's finances. The discussion is hushed, but brimming with tension. You try not to laugh. Any amusement at this level could brand you as insolent. There's also the curious case of the place marker. A folded napkin, a carved wooden token, even a small knife lodged upright. Each signals rank. You instinctively place your own utensil just so, hoping no one notices the wood is cracked at the tip. The edges of the table are practically a jungle, where etiquette is the only machete protecting you from social embarrassment. And then there's the matter of who talks to whom. Conversation is strictly monitored. You might compliment a dish to please the cook, but nodding too vigorously toward a neighbor? That could read as flirtation or conspiracy. Historians still argue whether diners truly followed these invisible rules, or if rules were exaggerated by chroniclers trying to make the noble class seem more ceremonious than they were. Either way, you're taking no chances. The feast unfolds like a dance. Servants appear, disappearing, balancing platters of roast meats, pies, and puddings. You notice one man at the far end accidentally grabs a chicken drumstick meant for the bishop. Gasps ripple like waves. The man swallows, pretending innocence, but his sweaty breath betrays him. Every bite here is a negotiation, a test of timing, and the display of tact. You clutch your wooden spoon like a sword, silently hoping for invisibility. You glance upward, noticing the banners and coats of arms that frame the hall. They're a visual reminder of loyalty, lineage, and lingering rivalries. Each family symbol is a silent argument about who belongs at the top and who's forever relegated to the bottom. Even the bread on your plate isn't neutral. In some regions, the freshest loaf is reserved for the noble few. Remember that the trenchers doubling as plates can tell you as much about rank as the salt and the seating chart. Here's a quirky detail. Some households maintained a funeral bench for newcomers, an empty chair at the far end, symbolically warning, "Mind your manners or you won't leave alive." You glance at it nervously, realizing it's probably just folklore, but you still inch away from that spot. The ale flows slowly in horned cups. Drinking too quickly, or worse, raising a cup before the Lord, is a faux pas that could start a minor scandal. You sip cautiously, trying not to glance at the Lord's wine, which is richer, deeper, and possibly enchanted by subtle herbs. Historians still argue whether such herbs were medicinal, ceremonial, or just a clever trick to keep guests slightly tipsy and compliant. By now you've met the terrain. You know who's likely to steal your bread, who's angling for a stolen drumstick, and who's silently counting coins under the table. The seating hierarchy is a living organism, shifting with every gesture, every laugh, every pointed elbow. And you, dear diner, are right in the middle of it. Armed only with a wooden spoon, a hopeful sense of discretion, and a growing awareness that surviving dinner here requires the patience of a saint and the... While some diners eat exclusively with spoons or knives, others freely use their fingers to retrieve morsels, especially meat. There's an unspoken law here. The higher your rank, the less you must touch your food. The lowest ranks and the servants at the end of the hall are expected to grapple directly with bread and bones. You follow along cautiously, realizing that dipping into a communal pie with your hand might be considered both bold and barbaric. Spoons are fascinating in their hierarchy. Pewter or silver ones indicate prestige. Wooden ones mark humility or modesty. Some nobles have decorative handles shaped like animals or saints. You briefly admire a spoon topped with a tiny lion, noting the quiet messages encoded in design. Each utensil conveys identity, taste, and, perhaps most importantly, social awareness. You wonder how many whispered insults might be delivered by a subtle tap of a spoon on the table. The positioning of cutlery is also significant. A spoon laid beside a plate is neutral. Balanced over the bowl at the end of a meal, that signals you are finished and content. Slightly askew, perhaps you've been rude or indecisive. The rules are meticulous, and you quickly realize your warped wooden spoon is both a tool and a test. Remember, a careless gesture could earn you a scowl from a neighbor or a whispered remark about your lack of breeding. Here's a quirky detail. Some tables even had spoon duels. No one drew blood, but guests would tap spoons rhythmically against the table to assert dominance, timing, or musical skill. You chuckle quietly, imagining an entire dinner orchestra conducted by clinking utensils, the rhythm of politeness and competitiveness intertwined. And knives? Some households had knives with handles carved from antler or bone, rumored to carry protective charms or blessings. Scholars still debate whether these were genuine superstitions, early branding, or clever marketing by artisans. The mere presence of these knives made guests pause, if only for a second, acknowledging the layers of ritual embedded in eating tools. Finally, there's etiquette in how utensils are used. You notice a noble delicately spearing a piece of meat with a knife, then sliding it onto a spoon before lifting it to his lips. It's a dance of precision that separates the civilized from the crude. You attempt to mimic subtly, wondering if your slightly bent wooden spoon can keep up with centuries of tradition. Every motion counts. Every gesture is both social navigation and personal survival. By now, your respect for spoons has skyrocketed, not just as utensils, but as tiny hieroglyphs of status, taste, and social intelligence. And as you carefully sip from your communal cup, watching who reaches first, who waits politely, who dares to slurp, you realize the battlefield isn't just the food. It's the tools you wield, the movements you make, and the silent commentary your actions generate. You glance down at your plate, or rather, your trencher. Medieval diners often ate off thick slices of stale bread, hardened enough to hold the weight of meat, but soft enough to soak up gravy. It's a strange sensation at first, pressing your stew-soaked bread against your lips. But soon you notice the practicality. The trencher is edible, reducing dishes and washing effort. Historians still argue whether the practice was born from necessity, frugality, or a subtle class distinction. The lord might discard his trenchers, while the poor had to eat every last bite. Ale sloshes in your cup, thick and cloudy, often flavored with herbs or spices meant to disguise the water's impurity. You lift it carefully, aware that spilling ale on someone's sleeve could signal social aggression or simple incompetence. Fringe evidence suggests some households intentionally brewed weaker ale for guests of lower rank, a passive form of dominance disguised as hospitality. You glance around, noting which cups are silver, which are wooden, and which have clearly been passed along 3 times already. Timing your sip is almost as important as the sip itself. Bread is more than a food item. It's a tool of etiquette and subtle power. You watch a young squire tear off a piece from his trencher, careful not to appear greedy. Taking too much could signal gluttony or disrespect. Too little might mark you as weak or timid. The loaf itself can be a silent measure of hierarchy. Some lords even carved intricate designs into their bread, a whimsical flourish intended to remind diners of wealth, creativity, or divine blessing.
Remember that bread isn't just carbs, it's diplomacy in edible form. You notice a curious habit, dipping the trencher into sauces, then offering it to a neighbor, a subtle gesture of camaraderie or challenge. A miscalculated hand movement could result in spilled sauce, angry murmurs, or, if you're unlucky, an unplanned duel of words. Scholars still debate whether these small acts were truly ritualized or simply accidents that chroniclers later exaggerated. Either way, you navigate the interaction carefully, spoon in hand, heart racing, trying not to offend anyone while still keeping your dignity intact. Ale and bread aside, postures and gestures matter. You lean slightly forward to indicate attentiveness, but not so much that you seem overeager. Elbows stay off the table unless you are firmly of the servant's class or deliberately signaling rebellion. You notice a neighbor gingerly breaking his bread in tiny pieces, contrasting with a bolder diner who tears slabs like a ravenous wolf. Every bite is a social clue, every gesture a silent announcement of rank, personality, and wit. And the leftovers. Oh, the leftover politics. Dogs, often present in the hall, are usually allowed to scavenge scraps, but only after a carefully orchestrated pause. Offering a trencher to a dog too early could be interpreted as disrespect toward the living guests. You watch as a scruffy hound waits, patient, while diners finish their portion, occasionally receiving morsels tossed deliberately to measure reactions or reinforce social norms. A quirky fringe detail: some households had official dog overseers, ensuring the animals didn't upset protocol or steal noble bread before proper distribution. You marvel at the choreography. Each diner juggles bread, ale, spoons, knives, and social expectations. The smallest misstep, a dropped trencher, a licked spoon, or a prematurely chewed bite, could result in embarrassment, whispers, or worse. You navigate carefully, learning the rhythm of tearing bread, sipping ale, and nodding politely. Every meal is a lesson in patience, observation, and subtle cunning. Even the simplest act of tearing bread involves calculations: how much to reserve, when to dip into the sauce, whether to offer a morsel to a neighbor. The process is almost meditative, a strangely hypnotic dance of etiquette that keeps you alert, yet oddly relaxed. By the time the main course ends, you feel like you've survived a trial, not of hunger, but of social precision and the quiet comedy of human ambition. The last course approaches and you're weary but alert. You notice the ritualized nature of post-feast etiquette. Blessings are recited over the final bread and wine, not just for gratitude, but as a subtle reminder of social order. Guests bow slightly, touch goblets with measured fingers, and murmur phrases that acknowledge both the host and the invisible hierarchy. Historians still argue whether these gestures were truly religious or cleverly designed theater to reinforce rank. You follow along, aware that skipping even a single motion might brand you a rebel or a fool. Whispers fill the air, disguised as gossip. Discussions about alliances, land disputes, or minor scandals drift around the hall, mingling with the aroma of burned meat and stale ale. You lean in carefully, catching fragments of stories about who's indebted to whom, who stole another's trencher, and who might be courting scandal for sport. Fringe evidence suggests some chroniclers exaggerated these interactions, imagining that every glance and whisper was politically charged. But even in exaggeration, the tension feels real. You adjust your posture, sip slowly, and silently hope no one notices your fascination. Leftovers are the final battlefield. Dogs, children, and servants are now allowed to scavenge, but there's etiquette even here. You watch as a servant tosses scraps in carefully measured portions, avoiding noble's feet and ensuring no morsel is wasted. A curious quirk:
Some hosts would intentionally drop a particularly desirable piece to observe guests' reactions, a social experiment disguised as generosity. You chuckle at the thought and discreetly eat your trencher, already thinking of the stories you'll recount later. You notice the subtle signs of fatigue around the table. Noble hands, once poised, now tremble slightly over spoons. Elbows creep toward the table, a forbidden zone. Conversation softens, laughter becomes gentler, and even the clinking of cups seems quieter. The post-feast ritual serves as both closure and assessment. Who followed the rules? Who entertained? Who respected hierarchy? And who, like
You survived the ordeal with a mixture of grace and relief. By now, the hall feels simultaneously enormous and intimate. You've witnessed the unspoken codes of dining, the politics embedded in bread, ale, and utensils, and the quiet battles fought over trenchers and silver spoons. You realize that survival was never about appetite alone. It was about observation, mimicry, and timing. Every glance, every sip, every gesture told a story. You've become part of this living narrative, even as a temporary outsider, and you appreciate the subtle humor and complexity woven into each action. A quirky final note: some feasts included a ceremonial offering of leftovers to favored dogs or visiting minstrels, a blend of superstition, hospitality, and ritualized entertainment. Historians still debate whether these acts were meaningful or performative, but to you, they feel like the last wink of this peculiar, fascinating world. You push back your trencher, glance around, and realize that the hall's energy has shifted from chaos to quiet reflection, as if everyone collectively exhales, acknowledging that the dance of etiquette, hierarchy, and spoon mastery has reached its conclusion. The great hall is settling. Candles burn lower. Smoke curls lazily toward the rafters, and the jester finally slumps, exhausted. You rise carefully, still holding your wooden spoon, a small trophy of your perseverance. Outside, the night air is crisp, promising freedom, and yet the images of clinking spoons, overturned trenchers, and subtle power plays linger pleasantly in your mind. You realize that medieval dinners, bizarre as they were, offered more than food, a lesson in humanity, patience, and quiet cunning.